Well, we made it to Friday for the best day of the week. It's the Morning Pitt Mailbag. You know, I always say that I look forward to this. Hopefully you do too. I know we all look forward to Friday, and I certainly look forward to the Morning Pitt Mailbag the most. It's my favorite episode of the Mailbag to do, or my favorite episode of the Morning Pitt to do every week, because you guys pick the topics. You come up with a comment, you come up with the questions on Panther-Lair.com throughout the week, and we answer as many as we can here in the mailbag. Got a lot of great questions this week, some recruiting questions, some team questions, some history questions, some hypothetical questions, some over-under questions, all my favorite stuff. We're playing all the greatest hits right here on the mailbag, so let's get it started. Morning Pitt Mailbag right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I don't know why I said it like that. I'm not sure. But, you know, sometimes inspiration strikes. For better or for worse, sometimes inspiration strikes, and I suppose it did right there. But this is the Morning Pitt Mailbag here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see the website below, Panther-Lair.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, transfer portal, all that stuff right here. Or right there on Panther-Lair.com, and of course message boards to talk to other Pitt fans all day, every day. Pitt fans are hanging out on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com talking about Pitt sports. So check it out, Pitt site on the 247 Sports Network. And then, of course, we have our YouTube channel right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's a place you can get all of our Pitt video content. These morning Pitt videos every day of the week, Monday through Friday. Our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. We have post-game shows, press conferences, interviews, all those things. You can find it right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. So make sure you do that. We would appreciate it, and you will be locked in. Let's jump into the mailbag, get our questions here, and PGH SunJ1325 has probably the most obvious question of the week, at least in the question everybody's asking. Early prediction for how many commitments after this first official visit weekend. So Pitt came into the weekend with five commitments, I should say. Those 5 guys are among the 20 or so confirmed official visitors that we're expecting Pitt to have here. We're still kind of tracking down a few things as of this recording. We'll see if any more chips out. So you got about 15 or so uncommitted guys who are visiting. I would say it's probably reasonable to expect to see, well, you got a minimum 6 to 8. You know, Pat Narduzzi, Pitt is it tweets tomorrow. I think yesterday I said they were Hail to Pitt tweets, but they're not. They're Pitt is it tweets, the old Pat signal as it's come to be known. I think you could probably expect to see those tomorrow throughout the morning and maybe early afternoon. Maybe tonight. You know, typically I think you see the commitments happen on the final day of the official visit, so I think you'll probably see 6 to 8 or so kind of pop out throughout. You know, like I say, maybe tonight, but probably tomorrow morning. That would probably be the minimum that I would expect. And then maybe some more guys jump on a little bit later after the visit weekend. But I think it's probably reasonable to expect that. And we've talked about who we think they've got a great chance of landing. We've talked about who we think is a top target or a most likely target and all of those things. And so, you can find all of that on the message boards. But I would start your expectation at probably 6 to 8. And then see if they can get a few more after that. 121 Rum says, who's your favorite player or who you found the most entertaining from a rival school while covering Pitt for both football and basketball? So I'm guessing you're talking about just watching these guys play. It's not necessarily interviews. I haven't interviewed too many other players. You mean guys from other teams. Basketball, you tend to get the opposing coach and players. It's all one sort of flow. You're sitting in the media room at the Peterson Event Center, and the Pitt coach and players will come in, the opposing coach and players will come in. You get everybody. But football, you really, you kind of have to choose either home team or visiting team because it's all sort of happening at once. So I don't get a chance to interact with many, opposing football or, players or coaches. Basketball side, we've interacted with them a little bit more. But I'm guessing you're talking about on the court and on the field. Like, who are the most entertaining guys to watch? And, I think a few come to mind. While I certainly wouldn't say that watching the 2005 and 2006 Pitt West Virginia games was a pleasant experience from anyone coming at it from a Pitt perspective, I don't think there's any denying it that Pat White was pretty awesome as a college football player. I think he should be a college football Hall of Famer. Quite frankly, I think there's a designation or a rule, like you have to be an All-American or something like that. But I mean, Pat White was incredible. I mean, I think he legitimately was one of the best or most impactful and dynamic players in college football at the time. And while, I don't think anybody enjoyed watching him run all over Pitt in 2005 and 2006. He did a little bit less of that in 2007 and 2008, but nobody really enjoyed that. But I mean, you can't deny how good he was. He was a sensational player and a guy that was just electric, that you knew every time the ball was snapped. It's not even like every time he gets the ball. Every time the ball was snapped, something exciting could happen because Pat White was touching the ball at some point. Steve Slayton was pretty awesome too. Those guys were such a dynamic duo and so tough to defend, and that's what made that 2007 game all the more kind of unbelievable. I mean, Pat White getting hurt and missing a lot of time there certainly helped, but Pitt's ability to sort of eventually shut those guys down was really remarkable, and because they very much did not shut them down in 2005 and 2006. So those guys, I would say, on a the football side. On the basketball side, that's a good question. I'd have to think, because I'd have to probably go back, because there's so many guys that you see once every now and then. You don't see guys as consistently nowadays as you did back in like the Big East days, when you saw teams a couple times, and you saw players a couple 3-4 times over the course of 3 or 4 years. Those Villanova guards were always really good and exciting to watch. The Marquette guards were always really good and exciting to watch. Notre Dame seemed to always have a guy who could just get his shot. I hate to go to the hoopy well again, but I mean, the reality is, like, it was incredibly frustrating to watch. But I mean, Kevin Pittsnogle was nothing if not entertaining. This big dude who just like could drain threes. I mean, it was a killer to watch him do it against Pitt and beat Pitt, but like, it was entertaining. I don't think you can say you can't say you were not entertained by that, even if it was sort of in a train wreck kind of way that you just couldn't help but look. You couldn't bring yourself to look away. It was pretty entertaining. It was pretty entertaining. Spenges wants to know over-under on receptions in 2025 by Pitt's running backs and Pitt's tight ends. So going by last year's stats, Pitt's running backs had 68 receptions in 2024. Pitt's tight ends had 57 receptions in 2024. Now, of those tight end receptions, Gavin Bartholomew had 38 of them. Jake Overman had 17. Malachi Thomas had 2, so that gets you up to 57. The running back receptions, obviously, what did I just say they had? They had 68, and Desmond Reed had 52 of them. Was tied for the team lead in receptions with 52 catches. So, obviously a big bulk of those catches are going to go to Desmond Reed. I would actually think that the number will come down from 68 this year, that the running backs will have fewer receptions this year than they did last year. Desmond Reed might still catch 50 passes, but I'm not sure that the group around him will put up another 15 or 16 like he did. I mean? Just because there's so much uncertainty among those running backs. Juelz Goff seems good, but, we'll see. He caught 6 passes in 3 games. So, I mean, if he does that, averages 2 catches a game, and I'm not sure that he will. But if he does, he could end up, boosting them past 65, 68 into 70 catches. But then after that, you're really down to the freshmen, barring, Derek Davis coming back and whatever his role might be. So, I kind of think that, 68 receptions for the running backs last year, I might set the over-under at like 62.5, 65.5, something like that. Just because I think Desmond Reed will still get his, but I'm not sure the rest of the group will really fill in those numbers. Kind of likewise with the tight ends. 57 receptions for the tight ends last year, 38 of those to Gavin Bartholomew. Do I see Jake Overman catching 35 to 40 passes? I'm not sure that I do. He's going to have to catch some. Malachi Thomas is going to have to catch some. Those guys are going to have to bulk their numbers up, and Justin Holmes will probably have to contribute as well at tight end. But I just see overall the tight end production going down from where it was last year. And it wasn't that great last year, but last year was still one of the more productive years the tight ends have had under Pat Narduzzi. I mean, we talked about the tight end production earlier this week, receptions wise, last year was the second most for the tight ends in Narduzzi's 10 seasons. The high watermark was 2021. They had 67 catches for 788 and 10 touchdowns. Last year with 57 receptions, that's the second most. Yardage-wise, they had 504 yards, which was pretty low, actually. Tight ends had more yards in 2023, 2021, 2016, and 2015. So you're talking about, fifth most receiving yards for the tight ends last year under Narduzzi. And then they had 6 touchdowns, which is the third most. They had 10 touchdowns in 2021, 9 in 2015 with J.P. Holtz and Scott Orndorff, 6 touchdowns last year. I just think the production is going to go down. I just don't know if I see I don't know if I see Jake Overman being a 40-catch guy. And I just don't know how heavily featured the tight ends are in a Cade Bell offense. I was looking it up. I don't know if I have the stats readily available here. I might. Bell's tight ends just haven't. Wait, I had some here. I don't know if I really want to. 2023, the leading tight end caught 17 passes. In 2022, the leading tight end caught 20 passes. So there's not exactly a history of tight ends really producing in this offense prior to last year. Gavin Bartholomew catching 28 or 38 passes for Cade Bell, something of a high watermark in Bell's offense. I just don't know if it's heavily featured in the scheme. I think if Cade Bell looks at it, and he hasn't said this to me, but it's I could see him having this line of thinking, like, if he's going to throw the ball, if he's going to have passes thrown, he wants them to go to the wide receivers and Desmond Reed, because those are the guys who can make the biggest plays. I think the tight ends fall down that list behind the wide receivers, behind Desmond Reed, maybe behind Juelz Goff. I don't think Goff is going to outgain or catch more passes than the tight ends. That's not what I mean, but I just think in terms of priorities, tight ends are pretty low in this offense. Now, maybe this year it comes out and it looks different and they take a different approach to it, but we really just haven't seen Cade Bell's offenses at Pitt or Western Carolina emphasize the tight ends. So for an over-under there, like I said, they had 57 receptions last year. I might set the over-under for tight end receptions at like 41.5 or something. I'm really lowering my expectations for the tight ends this year at Pitt. Just really low. I like almost, rock bottom, of expectations. I just don't think that position group is going to do much this year. And it's okay. They can make up for it with the wide receivers and the running backs. Maybe they keep the tight ends in to block more, which is not something tight ends have done much historically in Cade Bell's offenses. But maybe they do more of that this year and try and add a little protection, keep the quarterback upright a little bit more, help the running backs, more than sending them out on pass routes to try to utilize them that way. So, I don't know. It's just not a position of emphasis, and I don't know if I really see that changing this year. Jay Lazinger says, I know there's been a lot of top X of the last 25 years talk, so I had this thought. If you could pick one quarterback and one wide receiver for Pitt to have on the same team, who would it be? Obviously, Larry Fitzgerald is the best wide receiver, but do you go with Joe Flacco because of his arm? Kenny Pickett because of his season? Somebody else? I think this is an interesting question. And largely because, look, the best season by a wide receiver in Pitt football history was Larry Fitzgerald in 2003. He caught 1,672 yards and 22 touchdowns. Is that right? Yeah, 22 touchdowns, right? So 1,600 yards, 22 touchdowns. Nobody's ever matched that number. Nobody's ever really even come all that close in terms of receiving yards in a season. Jordan Addison in 2021 was probably the closest. He had almost 1,600 yards, and he had like 17 touchdowns. And so I look at it, and I guess the question I would ask is like, all right, you take your, obviously Larry Fitzgerald, your wide receiver, right? Take your quarterbacks that you would want to talk about here. Joe Flacco, big arm, Kenny Pickett was the guy who was throwing to Jordan Addison for that second best season in Pitt football history. Whoever else you want to put out there, Tyler Palko, Bill Stahl, Tino Sinceri, Tom Savage, Nate Peterman, whoever else, Eli Holstein, and you ask yourself, the question I am asking myself is, do I think any of those guys could directly lead to Larry Fitzgerald doing better than he did with Rod Rutherford in 2003. And I'm not so sure that I do. I'm not so sure that I'm like, oh man, if you put Larry with Pickett, just think what he could do. Well, he already had almost 1,700 yards and 22 touchdowns. So like the bar is already set really, really high. Maybe like you could have a sort of a different conversation. Like imagine what Tyler Boyd would have done with Kenny Pickett, or what Tyler Boyd would have done with Rod Rutherford or something like that. But like Fitzgerald already had that like apex season. So how do you really improve that? Is there a quarterback who really improves it? The only guy I'd be kind of interested to see maybe would be Tom Savage. Because I think Tom Savage had a big arm. I mean, a huge arm. One of the biggest arms of anybody, we've seen here at Pitt in the last 20 years. It was a really good quarterback. Should have had a 3,000-yard season, except he was, peeing blood in the bowl game at halftime. And so he ended up about 40 or 50 yards shy of 3,000 yards. Got knocked around that year, got absolutely killed, and still almost had 3,000 yards in Paul Christ's offense, which is no small feat. So maybe, I would say maybe Tom Savage with good protection up front and Walt Harris's offense could get Larry Fitzgerald to a more productive season than he had with Rod Rutherford. But otherwise, like, how can I pick against what Fitzgerald did with Rutherford? Like, what quarterback of the last, of this century really would have gotten that much more out of Fitzgerald than what he got? 1,672 yards and 22 touchdowns. He's already at a really, really high level. I'm not sure there's a quarterback, even like Kenny Pickett, for as great as Kenny Pickett was in 2021. If you take Kenny Pickett in 2021 with Mark Whipple's offense and he's throwing to, Larry Fitzgerald, do they get over 1,672 yards? Do they get over 22 touchdowns? Maybe, but I mean, that's already a ridiculous amount of production. So I'm not so sure that it makes a huge difference. Fitzgerald outgained Addison by 79 yards, and that was playing in one fewer game, right? So maybe just stick with Larry and Rod. Maybe. Let's see. Parkview Prince says, as a journalist, which former basketball or football head coaches and staff did you find be the most engaging and best at handling the media? I can't imagine Kevin Stallings is making this list. Could see Dave Wanstead being great, Jamie Dixon being a stonewall, and Narduzzi being solid depending on the day. To be honest, Kevin Stallings was fine in interviews. He was honest. He was candid. He was sincere. He was in a really difficult situation, and was pretty okay with us. I never really had a personal issue with the man. It was a dark time for Pitt basketball, but like as an interview, and a press conference guest and all that stuff, he was fine. Jamie Dixon was incredibly difficult to deal with. He just didn't want to say anything, and it was always remarkable to me because when I would run into Jamie Dixon, I see him here or see him there, not in a press conference or an interview. I mean, he was great. A really personable guy, really interesting guy, funny, smart, engaging, you could, relatable. But boy, you sit in front of the microphone and it just shut down. Pat Narduzzi's fine. I think there's times where he probably is a little bit more defensive than he needs to be with the media. Dave Wanstead was really good, but Wani was better. Dave Wanstead was better when you just kind of ran into him. You know what I mean? Like, his interviews could be challenging sometimes if you wanted to write for it, because if there was an anecdote, you had to go fact check that anecdote, because a lot of times it didn't always line up with history. But his staff was great, though. I mean, like, the guys he had, they were good interviews. They were engaging guys. I think Dave Wanstead set a tone of, we're going to be not friends with the media, but we're not going to consider the media enemies. You know what I mean? The media is not out to attack us or argue, we're not going to have an antagonistic relationship with the media. We're going to engage with them. And I think those guys followed the lead. And so there were really good, good interviews there. Tony Wise was a good interview. Greg Gattuso was a good interview. David Walker was a good interview. Who else? Matt Cavanaugh wasn't it, but Frank Signetti was a good interview. Even back in 2009 and 2010. Who else? Trying to think. Paul Rhodes was a good interview, but he was a carryover from Walt Harris. Charlie Parcher was a good interview, same thing. Trying to think of who else they really had. Brian Angelico was okay. He didn't really want to do interviews. Jeff Hafley was pretty good. I mean, they had a good, engaging staff. I think Jeff Capel and his staff. Jeff Capel's a great interview. Like, whatever you want to say about Jeff Capel, he's a great interview. And, for those 2 years when they were winning and things were going really well, he became an incredible interview. And I always knew the potential was there. I mean, I remember saying in the first 4 years, God, if this guy could just win games, like this would be like the face of the athletic department. And for a little bit there, he was. And he was good for sounding off on any topic you wanted to talk about. He was insightful and genuine and almost vulnerable at points, talking about his history and what his experience was like as a player when he got vilified by Duke fans and Duke media. And so, I mean, it was great. And then the winning kind of faded and, I think his first few years, it was really tough for him. And I don't think, so the media, the interviews and press conferences weren't exactly his favorite thing to do because none of it was his favorite thing to do. But as they won, it got a lot better. And, I think if they can win again, it'll be a lot of fun interviewing him. And I think his staff is pretty good as well. So there's been a lot of good ones. I mean, there are not too many terrible interviews. Jamie wasn't a great interview. And he would probably take that as a compliment that I said that. if I said he wasn't a great interview, I think he'd probably appreciate it. All right, we got a couple questions left over, but I'd love to save some for next week because I know we got a head start on it. So appreciate everybody who submitted questions this week. It was a lot of fun as always. Make sure you stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com for all the coverage from the recruiting weekend, the official visits, and everything like that. And yeah, check it out, Panther-Lair.com. We got a special running 60% off your first year, your first subscription. So come and check it out, Panther-Lair.com. Pitt side of the 247 Sports Network. We will have a ton of content throughout the weekend. Coverage from the official visit weekend is going to be coming in hot and heavy. So make sure you stay tuned for it. And then, as we always ask you to do, like this video and subscribe. Subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And that way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you've had a great week. Enjoy your Friday, and we will catch up with you on Monday for a full official visit recap on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.